Welcome, everybody, again to The Hague and to our 50th birthday symposium. I'm really, really excited to be here with all of you, and thank you so much for coming. I'm convinced that sustainable water and sanitation services for everyone, leaving no one behind, can only be delivered by strong national and local wash systems. The challenge isn't in knowing that, the challenge is in knowing how to build those. In 2015, Robert's already mentioned it, we all know the world set itself the target of the SDGs. We're all dedicated to that. I think it's helped all our organizations to have a clear vision of where we need to go. But I think we all agree that we're not going to manage to get there with business as usual. But first, a little background. IRC was 50 in December. I've been at IRC for 19 of those years, 6 in my current role. But in fact, my interest in systems and complexity was sparked before that. Sometime in the 7 years or so between graduating as a civil engineer and joining IRC in 2000. Years spent delivering infrastructure projects in Niger, getting a master's in environmental technology and doing 4 years of PhD research work in Zimbabwe. I'm not sure exactly when that interest emerged. It happened over time. Stuff in systems often emerges. Perhaps it was working in Niger, wondering how the roads and the hospitals and the solar water supply systems were going to be sustained, the ones that we were spending millions of European taxpayers' money on. Certainly, it was spending 4 years living in rural Zimbabwe and looking at how people's livelihoods did and also didn't revolve around water. And certainly it was impacted by trying to understand that water, understanding the hydrology and the hydrogeology of a small headwater catchment to the River Save. I was also greatly influenced by being part of a broader network of people for whom systems thinking was natural, ecologists, rural development people. All of them trying to work out different ways of doing rural development. Someone who was particularly inspirational to me at that time, who helped me to understand the complexity of rural livelihoods, was a man named Andrew Matlock, who was an agricultural extension worker for Zimbabwe's Agritech's department. And he was the agricultural extension worker for Chivi district, which was where I was doing my PhD work. But importantly for this story, he was a dedicated local government civil servant. A man of humble beginnings, but immense drive. A man who dedicated his life to improving the lives of the farmers with whom he worked. A man who was inspirational and tireless, who always have the image of him riding his motorbike from one meeting to another, always engaged, always listening, helping me to do village mapping, helping farmers with their problems. And I introduce Mr. Matlock, there's many Mr. Matlock. I introduce him as a human being who had a big impact on me at a formative time of my life, but also as an archetype of local government technocrats, of civil servants, people who are often overlooked, underpaid, underappreciated in the broader development narrative. Whether that's people who coming from a private sector perspective or a community management perspective. Forgetting that behind each of these people, there's typically an extraordinary story of resilience and drive, often the first person in the family to get to complete primary school, or to go to secondary school, or to have a professional education. People who are, in my experience, almost always dedicated to bettering the lives of the communities they serve, because in fact they're sons and daughters of those communities. People who are the backbone of the water and sanitation systems that we're here to talk about. So, I joined IRC in 2000. I was recruited to do IWRM. That was the sort of thing people said back then. And since then, I've spent a lot of the last 19 years trying to bring those early insights into systems thinking and complexity to the work that we do in IRC, trying to help to develop a coherent systems-based approach to this funny little corner of development that we call WASH and where we make our homes. Working that out in concepts and approaches as diverse as local water governance, multiple use services, I saw Barbara earlier, and sustainability. Figuring out how to drive and support evidence-based change. And as part of that, developing the Learning Alliance concept and the concept of an organization acting as a change hub to collective action. And over those years, those 19 years, IRC itself has changed a lot from the organization I first joined. In 2007, we began to decentralize. We identified focus countries. More recently, we've completely re-engineered the organization to put system strengthening at the heart of what we do. Building on the lessons of a decade of work, better articulating our role as a hub for systems change. Since 2017, under our SDG-focused strategy, we've identified partner districts with whom to work for the next decade or more to drive towards 100% access. And we've been inspired by our Agenda for Change partners, people at WaterAid and Water for People, I'd call out in particular, in identifying the district as a critical scale for intervention. And we're talking systems, so it's never the district on its own. The district is nested within the region, is nested within a country. It has links to the international stage. It's also nested in catchments and basins. But it is a central locus for our efforts. And leaders from many of our partner districts, of IRC, but also some of our Agenda for Change partners, are here with us today. Political leadership and technocratic leadership. You are welcome, and you are absolutely essential to our joint task. So, my job in opening today is to help to frame our 3 days together, to set out a personal vision of what I think it is that we need to do to move forward. I'm not going to go into the details of WASH systems or systems thinking, because we're going to spend plenty of time talking about over the next 3 days. There is a background note, but above all, because you guys are the experts on this. The only tiny interjection I'll make there, for anyone who is in any doubt, I don't think any of you are, when we're talking about WASH systems, we are not just talking about pipes or pumps or toilets. We're talking about the people and the rules and the frameworks and the institutions that go around all of that hardware to make it deliver a service. What I want to talk about for the rest of this, though, is about how we go about building strong and resilient national and local WASH systems to meet the challenge of the SDG. And I want to underline that I'm not presenting building WASH systems as a hypothesis. I don't feel there's any need to prove that a systems approach is better than a non-systems approach. The evidence is all around us. We're here in the Netherlands. When you turn on a tap, water comes out. When you flush the toilet, it all goes away somewhere. And that's because there are strong systems. When we look at the failures we confront in the sector, broken down pumps, overflowing toilets, we'll see that there are weak systems. So, with that as background, I'd like to make 3 broad framing points for the rest of this talk. First one is about our need to become champions of losing systems blindness, of learning to dance with the system, and I'll explain what I mean. Second point is about the public nature of WASH. This is a public service, and government has a leading role to play in delivering it, the leading role. And the third point is about how I think through collective action, all of us can drive the systems change necessary to achieve the SDGs. So, let's start with systems blindness. Systems blindness is that thing that happens when you turn on a tap, you flush the toilet, you flick the light switch, and it works. and you don't think anything more about it. You don't think about all the magic that went on behind the scenes to make that happen. And a big part of what I try to do, or we try to do as IRC, is to remove systems blindness as a first step to building strong systems. Removing systems blindness, it sounds easy, but it's not just about intellectually knowing that there has to be a system there. It's about acknowledging that if we want to change the system, and I think we all do, we need to engage with it fully, however uncomfortable that might be. Uncomfortable, why? Because it may mean challenging what we're doing, asking if it makes any sense, if it's sustainable. Uncomfortable because it may mean working with people or institutions who we don't want to work with. We think they're inefficient, we think they're corrupt. Though inefficiency and corruption, I would both argue, can be seen as symptoms of systems failure as much as they are causes. So losing systems blindness is about thinking, yes, this is my bit of the system, whether that's as a service provider or a service authority, as a social enterprise or as an NGO. And it's then thinking about, okay, this is my bit, but where are the other bits? Who are the other people? Who is it I rely on for me to do my job and for my job to be meaningful in terms of delivering those services? So over the next 3 days, we're going to have a ton of opportunities to explore the system and to look at ways of losing our systems blindness, but more importantly, I would say to help others to lose their systems blindness, because we should all be champions of that. And those are going to be some of those deep nerd tools for mapping the system, for identifying our places in the system. And I'd introduce to any of you who haven't heard it before the phrase that Janella Meadows popularized, to learn to dance with the system. It's a phrase that I love because it has that, conjures up that image of adaptation and fluidity, and that's what being able to work in a system is really all about. I'm often asked by people that, Patrick, this whole systems thing, it's great, and you've got that background paper with those 9 building blocks, but that's an awful lot. Which ones are most important? Which ones should we focus on? Which is an incredibly difficult question. And to think about why, let me introduce a metaphor. Think about a bicycle. We're all here in the Netherlands. You've seen lots of bikes. So having a nice Dutch bike, sit up and beg, shiny Dutch steed. And then think about the building blocks that make up that bike. Wheels, frame, brakes, lights, right? And now ask that question again. Which building block is more important for that bike to work? Maybe I'm just going to really focus on getting a perfect back wheel, and I'll let someone else deal with the rest. And sure, maybe the lights, maybe the bell aren't quite as important as the wheels and the framework. But for the bike to work, some minimal set of elements have to be in place, and that's similar to wash. And I introduced the bike as a metaphor, but of course, a bicycle is a system, as much as it's a factor in a broader system, a transport system. And that transport system needs people to repair the bike, just like a water pump needs to be repaired. But it needs roads, it needs rules, so that you don't get run over by a bus when you're going to work. So systems thinking is all about framing. But whatever the frame, some minimal set of elements need to be in place. And what those minimal set of elements are is almost entirely defined by what the service is that you're hoping the system is going to deliver. So, enough about that. WASH is a system. We need to learn to dance with it. And my first ask of all of you is simply this: to become champions of systems, to become champions of losing systems blindness, to become champions of dancing with the system. The second point I'd like to make is that WASH is a public system. It's about providing a public service. No one, or almost no one, ever dies of thirst. And frankly, I'm not aware of many people dying of constipation. What they die of is the diseases that are related to poor water or poor sanitation. What they suffer from is having to walk a long way to get water, or not being able to go to school because of lack of menstrual facilities, or being afraid of being raped by a man because there's no latrine in the household. That's why we've made access to water and sanitation into a human right. That's why providing water and sanitation services is a public health intervention. And as a public health intervention, it's one that always has a positive economic return. The challenge is it doesn't always have a positive financial return. The critical, unavoidable point of all of this, though, is that government, and only government, has the means or the mandate to ensure universal access to water and sanitation services, leaving nobody behind. Because remember, no one dies of thirst. There's always some service, there's always some system. It's just that it often isn't reaching the levels of quality that we want it to. And to ensure that it becomes good enough, and that it does so everyone, government has to lead. And no, that doesn't mean the government has to be the service provider, but it does mean the government has to provide the framework in which services can be provided. And as part of that leadership, it does mean government has to provide public money. It does mean that government has to identify subsidy. And it does mean that government has to tax and use some of that tax to pay for some part of those services. Again, to ensure that we leave no one behind. It's about 100%. And it's because of that critical leadership role that I'm so excited to have so many of our government colleagues with us. And I should be fully honest here, I'm a civil servant's son, and my first job was as a civil servant, so I might be a little bit biased. But I would also say, think about the Mr. Matlock's of the world, think about the government servants you've met with and who have inspired you. You are the duty bearers for WASH. You are the people who are blamed when it's not there. You're the people who often inspire me the most in my work. And sadly, your work is often insufficiently seen or appreciated because we're all systems blind, or because the world is systems blind. When it works, no one's aware that you're there, or they complain that you're being paid too much. When it doesn't work, they're queuing up to knock on your door and demand that you do something about it. And while we're talking about government, let's not forget the politicians. And Minister, we're very pleased to have you here with us, but also our mayors and district chief executives. Because the reality is that universal access to water and sanitation only follows strong political leadership. We know that when government, and I really mean government, the senior level, the executive, the prime minister, the president, gets behind WASH, it happens. It's happened in Southeast Asia. It happened in a generation, in countries that were poorer than today's least developed countries. It's happening in India under the leadership of the Modi government. It's happening in Ethiopia with the One WASH national program. So, my second ask, particularly for the non-governmental people here, is twofold. One is that you support and cherish and follow the lead of your local government, civil service, champions, water authorities. That's the easy one. The second one, which I think is much more difficult for our sector, is to move beyond our comfort zone of engaging with sector technocrats and engage fully with the political. We have got to get the executives interested and passionate about WASH. Otherwise, we're going to spend the next 20 years complaining that there's not enough money and there's not enough attention given to it. And it's incumbent on us to reach out to the political leadership and convince them of why this is important. So, on to my third and final point, which is all about how to drive systems change and to build the strong national and local WASH systems that we all believe in. My suggested proposal of how to do that, the one that IRC is betting our organizational farm on, is through collective action. You've already heard Robert mention the district master plans. I've been present at launching 3 district master plans in this last year, in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, and in Uganda. And just linking to a point that Peter Lorne made earlier, these plans, I would say, are somewhere between a vision and a real plan. And actually, the vision is the more important part of what's contained in them, I think, at the moment. Because there's millions of plans. We all know there's plans. There are desks covered in plans that no one reads. There are cupboards bursting with them. So what's different about these plans? Why am I excited about them? Well, I think they're different because they're formed at the district level. And they're unambiguously committed to getting to 100% coverage by 2030. So that's a really big thing. But I think more importantly, these plans are outputs of a political and social process. Each was developed by a multi-partner team led by government, both political and technocratic. They brought together the private sector, civil society, civil servants, political leaders, traditional leaders. Supporting implementing those plans is what IRC is dedicating itself to for the next few years in our role as a change hub. Each of those plans, I would argue, represents a systems-level intervention. Each one is an expression of political support backed by a multi-constituency partnership. And that approach, this approach, of collective action in support of government initiatives lies at the heart of multiple initiatives whose members are in the room. And just to shout out, and that I'm very proud that IRC is a member of, Sanitation and Water for All, the Agenda for Change, the Millennium Water Alliance, the Dutch SDG Alliance, the Conrad N. Hilton Safe Water Strategy, the Sustainable Wash Systems Partnership, and I've probably forgotten some. So again, I think we have a feeling that we are part of a growing movement who are dedicated to this way of working. And so to my final ask. If you're not part of one of those partnerships I've just mentioned, join us. And to all of us who are already in those partnerships, let's look at how we can be more effective, how we can link together better, how we can align our efforts. Colleagues from government, NGOs, the private sector, academia, development partners, donors. We all want the same thing. We want to achieve the SDG. We want to get water and sanitation to everyone. We all need each other. SDG 6 is an audacious, challenging, but inspiring goal. I'm convinced that by learning to dance with the system, by putting government at the center, and by working effectively together in collective action, we can build the strong systems and drive the systems change and achieve it. We can make water and sanitation for everyone, everywhere, and forever a reality. Thank you very much.